Cairo, Egypt, 2019. Inside the National Museum of Antiquities, the bustling noise of tourists didn't just fade away, it froze into a heavy, absolute silence. It happened the moment a 4-year-old boy pressed his hand against a glass display case pointing at a papyrus that had baffled experts for months. It says here that Jesus had a secret friend, the boy whispered. His voice was crystal clear, cutting through the quiet. The archaeologists nearby felt the hair on their arms stand up. They didn't know it yet, but they were about to witness something that would challenge everything. We think we know about the most significant story in human history. Mateo Hernandez is 4 years old, has honey-colored eyes, and a mind that works differently from most people. Diagnosed with autism at age 2, the little Mexican boy developed an obsessive fascination with ancient symbols. His mother, Elena, a history professor at the University of Guadalajara, thought it was just a game when Mateo spent hours drawing signs that looked like hieroglyphs in his notebooks. But that March morning changed everything when they visited the museum during a family vacation. The papyrus had been discovered 6 months earlier by a team from Oxford University in the ruins of a Coptic monastery near Nag Hammadi. It was dated to around 380 AD. The document remained untranslated because experts could not decipher its strange mixture of ancient Aramaic, Coptic, and unknown symbols. It had been on public display for just 2 weeks when Mateo entered the room for ancient manuscripts. Elena remembers that moment with a clarity that still makes her shiver. Mateo never spoke to strangers, hardly made eye contact with people, but when he saw the papyrus behind the glass, he ran toward it as if recognizing an old friend. The boy pressed his small hand against the glass and began to murmur in a language his mother did not understand. A security guard approached to ask them to keep their distance, but then Mateo said something in perfectly clear Spanish. "Mama, can I read this? Is this about Yeshua as a child?" Dr. Rashid Almasri, head of the museum's papyrology department, heard the commotion and approached with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. He had dedicated 30 years of his life to the study of ancient manuscripts and knew it was impossible for a small child to decipher what whole teams of specialists had failed to do. Yet something in Mateo's intense gaze made him pause. "Let the boy speak," he ordered the guard with a firm voice. What happened next would change everything forever. Dr. Almasri knelt before Mateo, adjusting his glasses with slightly trembling hands. "What do you see here, little one?" he asked, gently pointing to a specific section of the papyrus where the symbols seemed to dance in the yellow museum light. Mateo tilted his head to the side, that characteristic gesture he makes when processing information, and began to speak with a fluency that silenced everyone. Here it says that Yeshua was 6 years old when he met a boy named Eliezer in Nazareth. Eliezer was sick and could not walk well. The other children made fun of him. Mateo's voice is calm, almost mechanical, as if reading a bedtime story. Elena feels her heart pounding against her chest. Her son is describing specific scenes, not just random symbols. Dr. Almasri exchanges disbelief-filled glances with his colleagues who had gathered around them. Dr. Samira Naguib, an expert in ancient Coptic from the Oxford team, pulls out her phone and starts recording. "This is impossible," she murmurs in English, but cannot take her eyes off the boy. Mateo continues. His little finger traces invisible lines over the glass, as if following a map. Only he can see. Yeshua told Eliezer not to be sad. He showed him how to make birds out of clay by the stream. Here is the symbol for water. Mateo points to a specific sign that the experts had marked as indecipherable in their notes. And this here is the word for fly. Yeshua blew on the clay birds, and they flew as if they were real. Eliezer laughed for the first time in a long time. A heavy silence falls over the room. What Mateo just described matches almost exactly a passage from the apocryphal infancy gospel of Thomas, a text the child could never have known. But there is something else, something that sends a shiver down Dr. Almasri's spine. The specific details Mateo mentions the name Eleazar, the condition of the sick child, appear in none of the known apocryphal gospels. "How do you know all this?" Mateo asks Elena. Her voice breaks with emotion. The boy finally turns his gaze from the papyrus and looks directly at his mother with those honey-colored eyes that seem to contain an ancient wisdom. "The letters tell me, Mama. I can hear them speak. I always could." Dr. Naguib quickly comes over with her tablet, showing high-resolution photos of specific papyrus sections. "Mateo, can you tell us what this symbol here means?" she asks, pointing to a sign in the upper corner that had baffled linguists for months. The boy does not even hesitate. That is the symbol for witness. It means someone saw what happened and wrote it down, so it would never be forgotten. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Dr. Almasri makes a decision that violates all museum protocols. He orders the papyrus to be taken to a private research room where Matteo can examine it more closely, without the glass in between. If this boy can really read what we could not decipher in 6 months, we must document every word he explains to a nervous curator who protests about safety regulations. Elena quickly signs the permission forms, her hands shaking so much she could hardly hold the pen 20 minutes later, in a room illuminated with special lights that protect old materials. Matteo sits before the papyrus spread out on a padded table. The document is approximately 42 centimeters long and 89 centimeters wide, with irregular edges showing the passage of 16 centuries. There are sections where the ink has almost completely faded, and others where the symbols remain amazingly sharp, as if written yesterday. Matteo reaches out his hand, but Dr. Naguib gently holds him back. We must not touch the papyrus directly, sweetheart, but you can look at it as long as you like. The boy nods and begins to lean over the document. His eyes move from left to right with a speed that seems impossible for his age. For 3 full minutes, no one dares to breathe. The cameras installed in the room capture every second of the event. Then Matteo begins to speak, and what he says makes Elena need to sit down. This papyrus was written by a man named Tobias. He was the older brother of Eleazar, the boy who could not walk well. Tobias was 16 years old when he met Yeshua. Here is his name. He points to a group of symbols in the lower right corner that no one had identified as a signature. Tobias wrote this 53 years after Yeshua died. He hid it because he was afraid of being killed if he told the truth. Dr. Almasri leans over his notebook and frantically notes every word. What truth, Matteo? What did Tobias fear, revealing so much? The boy continues. His voice keeps that monotone tone characteristic. When he is deeply focused, Tobias saw things no one else saw. Things Yeshua did when he thought he was alone. But Tobias followed him secretly because he wanted to understand how he had healed his brother, Eleazar. The room fills with an electric tension. Dr. Naguib brings her face closer to the papyrus, comparing what Matteo says with the signs she can partially identify. My God, she whispers in Arabic. Here is a word that could actually be translated as follow or monitor, and this sequence here could be a proper name. She turns to Dr. Almasri with wide eyes. This boy is reading symbols we classified as decorative or damaged. How is this possible? Matteo lifts his gaze from the papyrus and speaks a sentence that will burn into the memory of everyone present. Tobias wrote that Yeshua had entrusted him with a secret. He told him where something very important could be found, and this something is still waiting there. During the next 4 hours, Matteo translates section after section of the papyrus, while a team of 12 specialists checks every word against databases of ancient languages. What they discover takes their breath away. The boy not only correctly identifies signs in ancient Aramaic and Coptic, but also deciphers a third writing system no one had seen before. A mixture of symbols that seem to be a kind of private code created by Tobias himself. Elena watches her son with a mix of pride and terror. Matteo shows no signs of fatigue. On the contrary, he seems more focused than ever, as if he finally found the purpose for which his extraordinary mind was created. Here Tobias describes the day he followed Yeshua to a cave in the hills near Nazareth. Continues the boy, pointing to a section where the symbols become smaller and tighter. It was a secret place where Yeshua prayed when no one saw him. Dr. Almasri leans forward attentively. A cave. Does the papyrus mention a specific location? Matteo nods slowly and begins to describe details with a precision that seems impossible. Tobias wrote that the cave was 2,400 steps north of the main well of Nazareth. You had to go up a path of white stones until you found 3 olive trees forming a triangle. The cave entrance was hidden behind a big heart-shaped rock. The room explodes in disbelief. Murmuring, Dr. Nagib quickly opens her laptop and starts searching archaeological maps of ancient Nazareth. That is incredibly specific, she says, while her fingers fly over the keyboard. If these details are correct, we could be talking about a place that was never archaeologically explored. Dr. Almasri shakes his head, trying to process the impossible. Boy does. The papyrus say, what was inside this cave? What did Tobias see? Matteo remains silent for a moment, his eyes scanning the last section of the document. When he finally speaks, his voice sounds different, deeper, almost as if it were not quite his own. Tobias entered the cave without Yeshua knowing. Inside were markings on the walls, drawings, words in a language Tobias could not understand. But there was something else, something Yeshua had left there. The boy pauses for what seems like an eternity, a cloth-wrapped object. Tobias did not dare touch it because he felt he should not. But he wrote down exactly where it was. Under a flat stone on the cave floor, 7 steps from the entrance, Elena feels tears running uncontrollably down her cheeks. Her 4-year-old son had just provided precise coordinates for an archaeological site that could change the understanding of religious history. But what comes next is even more disturbing. Matteo points to the last almost invisible symbols at the bottom edge of the papyrus. Tobias wrote a warning. He said that only the one who can read his words without having learned them will be worthy to find what Yeshua hid. The boy lifts his gaze to Dr. Almasri with an intensity that sends a shiver down the old archaeologist's spine. I think Tobias wrote this for me. The news spread like wildfire. In less than 24 hours, the story of the Mexican boy who deciphered a millennia-old papyrus appears in headlines of newspapers worldwide: CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera. Everyone wants to interview Matteo. The hotel, where the Hernandez family is staying, becomes a media circus, with reporters camping at the entrance, cameras pointed at every window, helicopters circling over the building. Elena makes the most difficult decision of her life. She turns off her mobile phone after receiving the 230th call, hugs Matteo tight, and whispers in his ear, "We will find this cave. My darling, we will finish what Tobias started." Her husband, Roberto, a civil engineer who had flown in from Mexico just 12 hours after the events became known, looks at them with a mix of pride and concern. "Are you sure about this? We don't know what we will find there. We don't know if it is safe for Matteo." But Elena has already made her decision. For years, she had seen how the world did not understand her son, how teachers and doctors labeled him as limited as different. Now, for the first time, Matteo has the chance to prove that his extraordinary mind has a reason. Our son was chosen for this, Roberto. I don't know by whom or why, but I cannot ignore what is happening here. Dr. Almasri organizes an emergency excavation expedition. In cooperation with the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and the Israel Antiquities Authority, a team of 15 experts is formed to travel to Nazareth to search for the cave described in the papyrus. Dr. Naguib insists that Matteo must accompany them. Without the boy, we have no guarantee of interpreting the coordinates correctly. He is the key to everything. 3 days later, the group reaches Nazareth under a scorching sun that makes the air shimmer over the dry hills. The modern city stretches over the ruins of the ancient village, where, according to the Gospels, Jesus grew up. The team first goes to the Basilica of the Annunciation, where, according to tradition, the angel Gabriel appeared to Mary. From there, they must calculate the 2,400 steps to the north that Tobias had described more than 16 centuries ago. Matteo walks, holding his mother's hand untouched by the media chaos they left behind in Cairo. He wears a blue cap for protection against the sun, and his little boots kick up dust clouds with every step. When they reach the point calculated by old coordinates, the landscape shows nothing special at first glance, just rocks, dry bushes, and the heavy silence of the desert. But then Matteo lets go of Elena's hand and starts walking east as if something was calling him. The trees. He simply says, pointing to an area where indeed 3 old olive trees twisted by centuries can be seen forming an almost perfect triangle. Dr. Almasri feels the hair on his arms stand up. My God, the papyrus was right. The team rushes after the boy as he walks determinedly toward the trees, guided by a knowledge no one can explain. And then they see it, a huge heart-shaped rock, partially covered by sand and vegetation. Exactly as Tobias described. 16 centuries ago, the team works for 3 hours to move the heart-shaped rock. It weighs about 800 kilograms and requires the use of pulleys and special ropes. When they finally succeed in shifting it, a dark opening becomes visible behind it, hardly wide enough for an adult person to pass through bent over. The air flowing out of the cave is cold and smells of old earth, of centuries of absolute silence. Dr. Almasri turns on a high-power flashlight and illuminates the interior. The walls are of natural limestone, polished by time and moisture. As the light penetrates deeper, everyone can see something that takes their breath away. Engravings, hundreds of symbols carved into the cave walls, some so small they seem to have been made with an incredibly precise tool. This is impossible, murmurs Dr. Naguib. Her voice trembles with excitement. These engravings seem to be the same age as the papyrus, maybe even older. Matteo lets go of Elena's hand and takes a step toward the cave entrance. I must go inside, he says, with that calm voice that has marked this whole experience. Elena looks at Roberto with obvious panic in her eyes, but Dr. Almasri kneels before the boy. Are you sure, Matteo? It is very dark inside. The boy nods without hesitation. The words, call me. I can hear them from here. After Matteo was equipped with a helmet, with a headlamp, and a safety harness connected to ropes, the team allows the boy to go inside first, closely followed by Dr. Almasri, Elena, and 2 other archaeologists. The interior of the cave is more spacious than it appeared from the outside, with a ceiling reaching almost 3 meters at its highest point. The floor is covered with a layer of compacted earth and small stones. Matteo walks exactly 7 steps from the entrance, just as the papyrus had indicated, and stops before a flat stone embedded in the ground. Here, he says, simply pointing down. The team begins to dig carefully around the stone, documenting every centimeter of the process with cameras and precise measurements. When they finally manage to lift the stone slab, roughly 60 by 40 centimeters, everyone freezes. Under the stone is a rectangular depression carved into the living rock. And in this depression, protected by almost 2,000 years of darkness, lies an object wrapped in what was once linen cloth, now almost completely disintegrated. Dr. Naguib lifts the package with visibly trembling gloved hands with utmost caution. It weighs only a few grams. As she begins to unwrap it in the light of the flashlights, the silence in the cave becomes so dense it seems palpable. What emerges from the old cloth is a small scroll of parchment, incredibly well preserved due to the dry and constant conditions in the cave. But what makes Elena cover her mouth with her hands is what is written on the outside of the scroll, in signs even she can recognize as ancient Aramaic, a single word that means testimony. Matteo stretches out his trembling hand for the parchment. I must read it, he says, with an urgency he had never shown before. I must read what Yeshua wrote. The scroll is immediately taken to a conservation lab at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. For 2 full days, conservation specialists work on stabilizing the document before it can be fully unrolled. Carbon 14 dating provides results that shake the foundations of biblical archaeology. The scroll dates to the year 33 AD with a margin of error of only 5 years, exactly the time period in which Jesus is said to have died. According to historical records, Matteo has not slept well since they left the cave. Elena finds him every night sitting on his hotel bed, drawing symbols in his notebook with an intensity that scares her. The words do not stop speaking to me. Mama, he says, with those honey-colored eyes that now seem to carry a burden too great for a 4-year-old. Yeshua is sad. He wants people to know the truth. When the scroll is finally unrolled in a high-security room, the entire team gathers around the specially made glass table. The document is 92 centimeters long and 24 centimeters wide. The ink, surprisingly black and legible, covers both sides of the parchment. It is written in ancient Aramaic, but interspersed with the same strange symbols that appeared on Tobias Papyrus and on the cave walls. Dr. Almasri allows Matteo to step closer, and the boy begins to read aloud without hesitation. What he says makes several present instinctively cross themselves. I, Yeshua, Bar Yosef, write these words in my 30th year, knowing that my time in this world is shortening. I have seen what is coming, and I cannot change it, but I can bear witness to who I really am and what I came to do. The translation takes hours. Matteo reads passages describing Jesus' childhood with never-before-documented details. He speaks of his confusion when he discovered his abilities, of his fear of being different, of the nights he spent in this cave to understand why he could do things others could not. But it is a specific section of the scroll that triggers a crisis among the religious members of the team. My earthly father, Joseph, taught me that love was more important than the law, reads Matteo. His childlike voice contrasts dramatically with the weight of the words. When the rabbis asked me about sin and purity, I saw only fear and control. The truth I came to teach was simple. We are all divine. We all carry the same light that I carry. I came not to be worshipped, but to show you how to worship the divinity that already exists within each of you. Rabbi Moshe Goldstein, religious advisor to the project, rises abruptly from his chair. This is heresy. This document, if it is genuine, contradicts 2,000 years of Christian and Jewish teaching. But Dr. Naguib points out something crucial, or it reveals what this teaching has hidden for 2,000 years. The scientific evidence is irrefutable. This scroll is authentic and was written at the right time. Matteo continues reading untouched by the debate raging around him. His words describe teachings omitted in the official Gospels, philosophies about the nature of God, reminiscent more of Eastern mysticism than traditional Christianity. And then he comes to a passage that changes everything. I have hidden 3 testimonies for future generations to find when they are ready. The first is here, in this cave, where I learned to pray. The second lies under the waters where I once walked. The third is at the place where I will breathe my last breath. The revelation that there are 2 more testimonies written by Jesus triggers a race against time. Religious organizations worldwide demand that the scroll be declared fake and destroyed. The Vatican sends official representatives, Muslim and Jewish leaders express their concern. But Dr. Almasri refuses to stop the investigation. The historical truth cannot be suppressed just because it is inconvenient for religious institutions. He explains at a tense press conference broadcast live to 250 countries. Matteo studies the scroll for days, searching for clues to the location of the second testimony. Under the waters where I once walked, he repeats over and over while drawing maps in his notebook. Elena researches obsessively on her laptop, comparing biblical references with geographical data, and then finds it, the Sea of Galilee, also known as Lake Kinneret, where Jesus walked on water, according to the Gospels. But the lake has an area of 166 square kilometers, explains Roberto, trying to be the voice of reason. How are we supposed to find something specific down there? Matteo does not answer with words. Instead, he points to a specific section of the scroll where there is a drawing no one had noticed before. It is a rudimentary map showing the east coast of the Sea of Galilee with an X-shaped mark near what would be the city of Kursi today. 3 days later, the team travels to northern Israel. A group of professional divers specialized in underwater archaeology joins the expedition. The Sea of Galilee is a freshwater lake with a maximum depth of 43 meters, but visibility can be difficult due to sediment. According to the coordinates Matteo took from the scroll, the second testimony should be located about 200 meters from the coast in an area about 25 meters deep. The first dive yields no results, neither does the second, nor the third. After 6 days of intense searching, the team begins to lose hope, but Matteo remains unshakable. Every morning, he sits by the lakeshore with his feet in the water, as if waiting for a sign. Elena watches him from a distance, wondering if she has pushed her son too far, if she has allowed this obsession to consume their lives. And then on the evening of the 7th day, something happens that no one can explain. Matteo sits as always by the shore, but suddenly he stands up and starts walking into the water. Matteo, no cries. Elena running toward him, but the boy does not stop. He walks directly into the lake until the water reaches his hips, then his chest. And just as Elena is about to jump in after him, Matteo stops and points down. Here, he says, with that calm voice that has become familiar, it is right down here. The divers rush over to mark the exact coordinates of the point where Matteo stands. When one of them dives down with sonar equipment, his voice comes over the radio with absolute disbelief. There is something here, an artificial structure. It seems to be a sealed stone box or container buried under a meter of sediment. The discovery of the impossible had just become even more impossible. The recovery of the stone box takes 48 hours of meticulous work. It is a box carved from black basalt, a volcanic rock common in the Galilee region, 35 centimeters long, 20 centimeters wide, and 15 centimeters deep. It is sealed with a mixture of resin and beeswax that has remained airtight for almost 2,000 years. When they finally bring it to the surface and place it on a protected work table, everyone can see inscriptions on the lid, the same strange symbols Matteo had deciphered. The boy approaches still with wet hair from the lake and reads without hesitation. For the one who hears the silent words, the second testimony of Yeshua, Bar Yosef, left at the place where I showed that faith can defeat the impossible. Elena hugs her son tight. Tears run down her cheeks. Her little one had just confirmed that this box had been placed there by Jesus himself. The process of opening the container is carried out in the lab in Jerusalem with all possible precautions. When they finally succeed in breaking the old seal, the escaping air smells of myrrh and spices, ingredients used in antiquity to preserve important documents. Inside lies another scroll, this one wrapped in purple silk, a luxury only the richest could afford. There is also something else that takes everyone's breath away, a small wooden object darkened by age in the shape of a bird. Exactly like the clay birds Jesus had made fly for Eliezer, according to the original papyrus. Matteo stretches out his trembling hand for the wooden bird and takes it carefully. The moment his fingers touch the old surface, the boy closes his eyes and his body tenses up. I can see it, he whispers with a distant voice. I can see Yeshua carving this bird. He is sitting by the sea. It is night, and he is weeping. He is afraid of what will happen, but he knows it is necessary. Elena tries to come closer, but Dr. Almasri signals her to wait. Something extraordinary is happening. For 3 full minutes, Matteo remains motionless, with closed eyes, holding the wooden bird. When he finally opens his eyes, tears run down his cheeks. He knew I would come, he says, with a broken voice. Yeshua wrote these testimonies for someone like me, someone who could read without having learned someone whose mind worked differently. He said, only such a person could understand the full truth, without doctrines and institutions distorting it. The second scroll proves to be even more revealing than the first. It contains detailed teachings on compassion, forgiveness, and the nature of human suffering that remarkably resemble Buddhist philosophies, something historians know Jesus could have learned during the lost years of his life, those years for which there are no records in the Gospels. But the most shocking part is at the end of the document. The third and last testimony is where everything will end for me, under the rock, where I will shed my blood for the last time. There I have left the most important words that will change everything humanity thinks it knows about death, suffering, and the true purpose of my sacrifice. Only he who has found the first 2 testimonies will be worthy to find the third. Matteo lifts his gaze to Elena with a determination he had never shown before. We must go to Jerusalem. Mama, we must go to Golgotha. Jerusalem receives the team with a storm of controversy. Thousands of protesters surround the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where according to Christian tradition, Jesus was crucified and buried. Some call Matteo a divine messenger. Others call him a blasphemer. The Israeli police establish a security ring, while the archaeological team, now escorted by special forces, enters the holiest site of Christianity. Golgotha, also known as Calvary, is a small rocky hill that today lies inside the church. Matteo goes directly to the venerated rock, ignoring the golden ornaments and altars built around it. He kneels down and presses his hand against the old stone. Here he says simply, under exactly this rock. The request to dig under the holiest site of Christianity triggers an immediate diplomatic crisis. But after 3 days of intense negotiation, the religious authorities grant permission for limited exploration using ground-penetrating radar. The results are astonishing. 3.5 meters under the Golgotha rock, the radar detects an artificial chamber never recorded in any architectural plan of the church. Access is impossible without a major excavation, but Matteo insists there is another entrance. Yeshua dug a small tunnel from the outside. It is sealed, but it still exists. Guided by the boy, the team actually finds a blocked opening in the outer wall of the church, hidden for centuries under layers of construction and renovation. When they finally succeed in opening the passage, Elena makes the most difficult decision. Only Matteo can go inside, she declares, while Roberto protests desperately. This is what he came for. We cannot stand in between now. The boy climbs down the narrow tunnel, a camera attached to his helmet transmitting live images to dozens of screens on the surface. The whole world watches in silence. The chamber under Golgotha is small, barely 2 square meters carved into the living rock. In the center stands a simple stone altar, and on it a miraculously preserved cedar wood chest. Matteo opens it with hands that no longer tremble. Inside is a final scroll and something else, a small glass vial with a dark liquid that later analyses will confirm as 2,000-year-old human blood. Matteo's voice echoes over the speakers, reading the last words written by Jesus. Whoever reads this, I did not come to found religions or divide humanity into saved and damned. I came to remind you that you are all children of the divine, that the kingdom of God is not in temples or in heaven, but in the heart of every human being. My blood I leave here not as a sacrifice for sins, but as proof that even in the moment of greatest suffering, I chose love. May these words destroy the walls men have built in my name and unite what should never have been separated. Matteo emerges, transformed from the tunnel. His honey-colored eyes no longer carry the burden of a misunderstood mission. Elena hugs him, while the cameras capture the moment for history. The 3 parchments are eventually displayed in the Israel Museum, where millions will see them. The religious institutions wrestle with the implications. Some accept, others reject, but no one can deny the irrefutable scientific evidence. 5 years later, Mateo Hernandez is 9 years old and leads a quiet life in Guadalajara. He no longer speaks of ancient symbols or messages from Yeshua. His autism is still part of him, but now the world understands that some different minds are not broken, but created to see truths others cannot. And in quiet nights, Elena still finds him, looking out the window at the stars and smiling, as if sharing a secret with someone who lived 2,000 years ago. Tobias' legacy was finally fulfilled. The silent words were heard, and the truth was, as it should always be, finally free.